We go live to Jerusalem, and CBC News chief correspondent Adrienne Arsenault. Adrienne, what are people keeping an eye on tonight?
I was listening to that list you had at the top there, Andrew. There's so much to keep an eye on, right? I think, why don't we start with Gaza for the moment? You know, as you explained, there's no power, the fuel is done, Gaza is dark, food, water, they're restricted. Israel is saying, incidentally, that no, not a single light switch will be turned on until the hostages emerge. How is that going to happen? The bombardment continues right now. You've got Palestinians who have been moving from their homes, a room in their home, to the hallway, to the basement, then they decamp to someone else's home, and then that becomes at risk, so they decamp again to a car. You've got roughly 330 million people who are internally displaced within that tiny enclave. So keep an eye on what happens with them. The bombardments, the airstrikes will continue. Israel says it's dropped some 6,000 bombs so far, though they say they are aiming for the Hamas infrastructure. But it's such a tightly populated place. I mean, there are civilians absolutely everywhere. So keep an eye on what happens in Gaza. To the point about the hostages, keep an eye on that too, in particular tomorrow, because you know the Americans have arrived. The Secretary of State. You also have an envoy for hostage affairs, if you will. People want to know what it is they are planning. There are American hostages amongst others. So what are they planning? People are watching Qatar. Qatar often gets involved in hostage negotiations around the world. Will it this time? Are there negotiations? That's something really important. Watch tomorrow, period, because Hamas has called for a global mobilization, it's calling it. Lots of people are nervous about that. Friday prayers is tomorrow. We had clashes up here in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, not that long ago. Schools and businesses are closed here. I have the sense that people in Israel will be largely quiet in their homes and not out much tomorrow. I think there is some enormous anxiety there. And then I suppose finally, watch what happens in the north. Will Hezbollah get involved? Watch what happens in the south. Will that ground invasion actually happen? There are so many ifs, but there is a momentum that you feel here driving towards something like that.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. What are the risks of a ground invasion of Gaza? How imminent could that be?
There are so many risks. I mean, obviously there are risks for people in Gaza, for Palestinians who are terrified of the prospect of that. There are risks for Israel. Now, it has the military might, but keep in mind, Hamas said it claims it has been planning the attack that it executed on Saturday since 2022, working on it for that long, which means it's also worked on how it would respond to an Israeli response. So Hamas controls Gaza. It knows the tunnels. It has built them. It knows the lay of the land. Israel controls the air and the sea, but Hamas controls what has happened in Gaza. So any sort of ground invasion will be extremely difficult for everybody.
And Adrienne, I know you've been there a few days, covered so much, including a funeral yesterday. What are some of the things that have stood out to you?
There are a lot, Andrew. I would say the volume of incredibly graphic, horrific imagery that is flying on these phones, in the WhatsApp groups, in the Telegram groups, and the efforts that people are making to verify them and geolocate them and treat them as evidence. There's a group from the first responders in the South, and they are posting constantly pictures of things that some of the first responders have found on the bodies of the Hamas fighters. And everything is being collected. And then there are the pictures of the bodies. And I know that what people see on the news is horrific, and they have a hard time listening. And I cannot tell you how many choices you make when people talk about this, about what not to say, because it is so bad. And I'm shocked at the extent to which people want to talk about that. Families who have endured and continue to endure unspeakable things, saying, no, this is history. I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you what happened. And I want you to feel uncomfortable because this is horrible. People in Gaza have shocked me too. They have, barely have 2G cell service. And every time we try to call in, people are like, I want to talk to you. Let me tell you what's happening. Let me see if I can explain to you what I'm seeing in front of me. There is this urgency to get the journalists, if you will, get them, bring them, show them, have them chronicle the history of this. There's this feeling that this is, of all the terrible things that have happened here, there's a feeling that this is an inflection point, possibly a turning point, and people want this history chronicled.
And then finally, Adrienne, you mentioned Gaza. There has been talk about setting up a humanitarian corridor to Gaza. What's happening there? Is there any hope of that actually happening?
I don't know about hope, and I don't know if it will happen. There is a big push. There was a suggestion that maybe there could be like a 6-hour ceasefire, was a suggestion from Egypt to create a humanitarian corridor. That would likely come through Rafah, which is a single crossing that Egypt controls. What about the people? I mean, it's one thing to get the aid and food and fuel in, but what about the people who are trying to get out? Like, where are they supposed to go? Egypt is not throwing open the doors and saying, come here to safety. It's absolutely not doing that. There might be a few reasons for that. There's been a suggestion from Egypt's leadership that they want, if everybody leaves, then what is the fate of the Palestinian cause if everyone is gone? There's another suggestion that possibly Egypt doesn't want to deal with that many desperate people. It has had, on another point, an insurgency in the northern Sinai. Maybe it's afraid of militants, of Hamas fighters coming across and fueling an insurgency in northern Sinai again. So if there's going to be a humanitarian corridor, that's the place to watch. When it happens, for how long, I have no idea.